There is a habit so deeply embedded in how you move through the world that you no longer notice you redoing it. You explain yourself to people who didn't ask, to rooms that weren't waiting, to individuals who had already decided before you opened your mouth. You explain when you're late. You explain when you disagree. You explain your choices, your boundaries, your reasoning, your silence. You offer context no one requested. You add qualifications to positions that didn't need them. You soften the edges of your decisions with words designed to make other people comfortable with what you've already determined. And every time you do, something leaves you. Not dignity, not quite. Something more precise than that. Authority. The quiet, invisible authority that accumulates in a person who has learned through discipline, not coldness. That explanation is often the first surrender. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this in a way that most people who invoke his name do not. He was not, as history has simplified him, a teacher of cruelty. He was a cartographer of power, a man who spent his life mapping how authority actually moves between people, in courts and councils and rooms where survival depended not on sincerity, but on strategic restraint. What he observed, across decades of watching the powerful and the powerless, was a pattern so consistent it functioned almost as a law of human nature. The person who explains their position to those who challenge it has already conceded something fundamental. They have communicated beneath the words that the challenge has weight, that the challenger has authority over their certainty, that validation from outside is something they require. And once that communication has been received, the dynamic has shifted, not because of what was said, because of what the saying revealed. Pay attention. This video is not about becoming difficult. It is not about becoming cold or evasive or deliberately obscure. It is about understanding with precision, without sentimentality, why the compulsion to explain yourself is costing you more than you realize, and what becomes available to you when you stop. By the end of this, something will have shifted in how you understand every interaction where you felt the pull to justify yourself. You will recognize it. And recognition is the beginning of choice. That is the only introduction this requires. Number 1, the explanation is a confession. Most people believe that when they explain themselves, they are providing clarity. They are not. They are providing evidence. Evidence of where their uncertainty lives. Evidence of which judgments they fear. Evidence of which specific accusations have enough weight to pull a response from them automatically. Think about what explanation actually does in a charged moment. Someone questions your decision. You feel the heat of it, the mild pressure of their skepticism, their disapproval, their implied critique. And without choosing to, without pausing to ask whether a response is warranted, you begin to speak. You construct a case. You walk them through your reasoning as if you are presenting to a jury that has the authority to overturn what you've already decided. Here's what most people don't realize. The jury you're presenting to is the same person who issued the challenge. And the moment you began presenting, you appointed them to that role. You handed them the gavel. Not because they took it, because you offered it. Through the act of explaining, you communicated that their assessment of your reasoning has the power to change your position. Or at minimum, that their comfort with your decision is something you're working to secure. That is not clarity, that is subordination. A scenario. You make a decision at work, a strategic call, a creative direction, a boundary you've set with your time. A colleague questions it, not with evidence, with tone, with the particular register of someone who implies, without stating, that they would have done it differently. The old version of you explains, walks them through the logic, addresses the implied concern, watches their face to see if the explanation landed. What you've just done is spend your credibility on their comfort. The new understanding, a decision that has been made does not require a defense. It requires at most a brief acknowledgement that you've heard the question, and a return to the matter at hand. I considered the options. This is the direction. No elaboration designed to prevent their disapproval. No architecture of justification built to make them comfortable with what is ultimately not their decision. Another scenario. In a personal relationship, you set a boundary. You tell someone that a particular pattern of behavior doesn't work for you. And they push back, not necessarily with argument, but with the visible performance of being wronged, with silence, with the slight withdrawal of their approval, and you feel the pull. To soften the boundary. To explain at length that you don't mean it harshly, that you understand their perspective, that you still care about the relationship, that the boundary comes from a reasonable place. You spend 10 minutes constructing a case for something you should have needed 10 seconds to state. Machiavelli would have recognized this immediately. He wrote in different language and a different century that the prince who constantly justifies his decisions to those below him has revealed that he fears their judgment. And the prince who fears judgment from below is not leading. He is managing. And management, as a posture, invites constant renegotiation. You are not managing anyone's feelings about your choices. You are not on trial for your decisions. You are not required to build a case that survives the cross-examination of people who didn't earn the authority to cross-examine you. The old version of you explained because you wanted to be understood. The new understanding is this: the people who matter will observe your decisions over time and draw conclusions from the pattern. The people who don't matter will find something to question regardless of how thorough your explanation is. And in both cases, the explanation changes nothing except your position in the dynamic. You stop explaining. Not out of arrogance. Out of precision. Your decisions are yours. The reasoning behind them is yours. What you choose to share of that reasoning, and with whom and when, that is yours as well. And what is entirely yours does not require a defense. Number 2, the apology that costs everything. There is a specific type of apology, you know it, you've given it. That is not actually an apology. It is a preemptive surrender. It arrives before the accusation, before the confrontation, sometimes before the other person has even formed a complaint. You sense the possibility of their disapproval and you move automatically to neutralize it. I'm sorry, I know this might seem, I don't want you to think this is not accountability. This is anxiety wearing accountability's clothing, and it gets worse. Because the preemptive apology does not protect you from disapproval. It invites more of it. It signals with remarkable clarity that the threat of disapproval is powerful enough to produce a response from you before it has even been fully expressed. Which means the other person now knows with precision that this particular lever, the lever of implied dissatisfaction, moves you, and levers that move people get used. Here's what most people don't realize. The compulsive apologizer is not perceived as humble, not by the people who matter most in any dynamic. They are perceived as uncertain, as someone who has not yet decided whether their own position is valid. And people do not grant authority, respect, or genuine trust to someone who has publicly not decided whether they deserve it. A scenario. You arrive somewhere slightly late. Not egregiously. Circumstances, traffic, the ordinary friction of existence, but you arrive with an apology already assembled. A full narrative of the delay. A visible performance of contrition that signals to everyone present, I know my time affected yours, and I need you to forgive me for it before I can settle into this space. Watch what that does to your standing in the room. Not dramatically, subtly, but real. You have walked in from a position of debt, and the rest of the interaction carries the faint weight of that opening. Compare this to the person who arrives with the same delay and says simply, let's continue, or says nothing at all, who moves directly into engagement, whose presence communicates that the delay was circumstantial and now resolved. Who commands more presence? Who seems more certain of their right to occupy the room? Another scenario. You've disagreed with someone. The disagreement was honest, not hostile. You were precise. But afterward, you feel the pull, the familiar discomfort of having created friction, and you approach them, not to resolve a genuine misunderstanding, to soften the fact that you disagreed, to make sure they're not upset, to spend the social capital you just built through the act of having a position, buying back their approval. Machiavelli observed something about leaders who sought approval after conflict that is worth understanding precisely. The seeking of approval after a decision signals that the decision was not made from certainty, but from calculation, and that the calculation is still open. It tells those who are watching that the position can be moved, not through better argument, but through the simple performance of discontent. This is not the signal you want to send. Have you ever apologized just to keep the peace? Or maybe you felt that awkward pressure to fill a silence in a conversation. What if I told you that these common habits might be undermining your authority and confidence? Today, we're diving into some powerful shifts in thinking that can completely change how you navigate conversations, negotiations, and even conflicts. These aren't just theories. They're practical strategies for reclaiming your power in everyday interactions. Let's start with apologies. The old you might have apologized to smooth things over, even when you did nothing wrong. You apologized for having a different opinion or for making someone uncomfortable with your clarity. But here's the new understanding. The peace you buy with constant apologies isn't real peace. It's a performance that requires you to shrink yourself. You apologize only when you've genuinely caused harm, when your actions created a real cost for someone else. You don't apologize for your perspective or for simply existing. You are not diminished. Act accordingly. Next, let's talk about the compulsion to fill silence. Most people are terrified of it. Not the silence of an empty room, but the quiet between people after a statement or a question. That pause stretches, and the urge to talk, to elaborate, to repeat yourself becomes overwhelming. We do this because silence can feel like disapproval. But here's what most people miss. Silence is not disapproval. It's just information you haven't processed yet. In high-stakes situations like negotiations or confrontations, the person who breaks the silence first often reveals their anxiety. They show they're more scared of the quiet than of the outcome. Think about it like this. You're in a negotiation. You've clearly stated your terms. The other side goes quiet. The old you would feel that silence as pressure and start to backpedal. You'd soften a condition or rephrase your offer, effectively negotiating against yourself before they've even made a counteroffer. The new understanding is this: once you state your position, you are finished. The silence that follows is theirs. You don't own it, and you don't have to fill it. You just wait. Let them be the one to break it. The same goes for difficult conversations. You say something brave, a truth you've held back. The other person is quiet. You'll feel the pull to soften it, to make it smaller and more comfortable. Instead, let the silence do its work. Let the weight of what you said land. Trust that your words are strong enough to stand on their own. The quiet is not your enemy. It's where your authority rests. Now let's tackle the danger of over-justifying your standards. You have standards for how you're treated, how you spend your time, and the relationships you invest in. These are built from your experiences. But what happens when someone pushes against them? The old you would probably launch into a detailed explanation, building a case for why your standard is reasonable. In doing so, you put your standard on trial. And here's the key: a standard that can be argued into suspension isn't a standard. It's a preference. And preferences get ignored. Authority isn't about how loudly you state your case, but how calmly you hold your ground. When you communicate a standard, say, about how you expect to be spoken to, and someone pushes back, you don't need to explain it again. You've already made your position clear. The old you would have engaged in a debate, maybe even softened your requirement. The new understanding is simple. Your standards are the terms under which you are available. People can choose whether to meet them. Your job is to observe their choice and act accordingly, without needing to defend your position. You are not unreasonable, you are precise. And precision doesn't need a defense. This brings us to our next point: the difference between performing certainty and actually possessing it. When people feel uncertain, they often perform certainty. They talk louder, use more definitive words, and double down on their position. They're afraid of being found out. But this performance is usually detectable. The person across from you can feel the difference between someone who is genuinely sure and someone who is just acting. And they'll often push harder against the performer because they sense the underlying flexibility. Real certainty is quiet. It doesn't need volume or repetition. It simply is. Think of two people holding the same position. One states it calmly once. The other states it, then looks around for approval, elaborating and restating until they get validation. Who seems more certain? The one who spoke once and trusted their words. The old you performed confidence to avoid being doubted. The new understanding is that you don't perform what you truly inhabit. When you have truly decided who you are, you don't need an audience to confirm it. Finally, what does silence after a provocation really mean? Someone tries to get under your skin with an insult or a challenging question. Your first instinct is to fire back, to prove you're not affected. But even a brilliant comeback confirms one thing: the provocation landed. It got to you. And that means the person who provoked you knows their tactic works. Here's what most people do and realize. Silence after a provocation doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you've decided it's not worth saying. This isn't about suppressing your feelings. It's about showing that the attack was insufficient to move you. In a group setting, if someone makes a comment to undercut you, just let a moment pass. Just long enough to communicate. I heard you, I considered it, and I've determined it doesn't require a response. Then you simply continue. This demonstrates a level of self-possession that is far more powerful than any verbal retort. By embracing these shifts, you stop reacting and start acting with intention. You learn to hold your ground, trust your voice, and command respect without ever raising it. Thanks for watching. If these ideas resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more content on building unshakable confidence. See you in the next one. Whatever you were doing before the comment, you return to it, without visible perturbation. Without the micro-expressions of someone containing an emotional response, they're not willing to show, because you are not containing anything. You are simply not moved. Watch what happens in the room. Watch the energy shift from the person who delivered the comment, who was expecting a reaction and has received stillness, and toward the person who remained steady. Another scenario. Someone close to you says something intended to create insecurity about your choices, your trajectory, your worth. It is the kind of comment that, in the past, would have produced a long interior conversation, a wave of self-examination, a reaching outward for confirmation that you are, in fact, okay. Now, you observe the comment. You notice what it was designed to do. And you let it pass without giving it the territory it was reaching for. Not because you suppressed something, but because you are more settled in yourself than the comment assumed. Because the ground it tried to destabilize is more solid than the person who delivered it realized. The old version of you responded to every provocation to prove you weren't affected by it. The new understanding is this: the person who is genuinely unaffected does not need to prove it. There still misses the proof. You don't react. You observe. An observation held with composure is a form of authority that no reaction can match. Number 7. The long consequence of how you hold yourself in small moments. Everything in this video has addressed specific moments, specific patterns, specific pulls toward explanation, apology, performance, reaction. But there is something larger than any single moment. There is the cumulative story your behavior tells about who you are. Not the story you tell in the moments you've prepared for. Not the story that emerges in the interactions you knew would matter. The story that forms from the aggregate of how you move through every moment, the small ones, the inconsequential ones, the ones where no one important seemed to be watching. Pay attention. This is where most people fail. Because most people manage their behavior in the moments they identify as significant. They are strategic in the meeting, composed in the confrontation, deliberate in the negotiation. And then they collapse into old patterns in the hallway, in the casual conversation, in the response to the text that arrived at an inconvenient moment. And the people around them see both. Here's what most people don't realize. Credibility is not built in your best moments. It is built in your ordinary ones. The person who holds their composure in the meeting but unravels in the hallway is read, accurately, as someone who performs composure rather than inhabiting it. The performance is visible as a performance. And performances, no matter how polished, communicate something different than the real thing. Machiavelli wrote, and this is the part of his work that the simplified version of his legacy obscures, that the prince, who is only strategic in moments of visible consequence, is not strategic at all. He is merely intermittently disciplined. And intermittent discipline does not produce the kind of authority that holds in pressure. It produces the kind that holds in performance and collapses exactly when it's most needed. A scenario. Someone who has been building their professional reputation across 2 years. Every formal interaction, polished. Every significant conversation, prepared. But in the informal moments, reactive. Slightly careless with their words. Mildly inconsistent in how they treat people depending on perceived importance. And the people around them have noticed. They cannot always name what they've noticed. But the calibration they make about this person's depth, reliability, and genuine authority has been shaped as much by the informal moments as by the formal ones. Compare this to someone else, who is the same in both contexts, not rigid, present. Whose behavior in the hallway matches the behavior in the boardroom, not in tone but in consistency. Who treats everyone with the same quality of regard, regardless of whether the interaction is observed by anyone who matters in the conventional sense. Watch which of these two people is trusted with what's real, with what's complex, with what requires someone whose composure is structural rather than situational. Another scenario. You have been working on the principles in this video. You have been more deliberate about explanation, more composed in silence, more consistent in how you hold your standards. And it is working in the moments you're aware of. But there is a pattern in the small moments that has not yet shifted. The quick explanation to the person who doesn't require it. The reflexive apology in situations that don't warrant one. The slightly anxious filling of silence in low-stakes conversations. These patterns are training you. Every time you explain without needing to, you rehearse explaining. Every time you apologize without cause, you rehearse the posture of apology. And rehearsed patterns do not stay only in low-stakes moments. They migrate. They become the default. They show up automatically in the moments that matter most. The old version of you believed that presence in the big moments was sufficient. The new understanding is this: the big moments are downstream of the small ones. What you practice in ordinary interactions is what you perform, without choosing to, in the extraordinary ones. This means the work is not occasional. It is continuous. It is not the discipline you bring to the moments you've identified as significant. It is the discipline that becomes so consistent, it stops feeling like discipline at all, and simply becomes how you move through the world. You are not someone who is careful when it counts. You are someone who is careful always. And the difference between those two people, experienced over years, is the difference between someone who occasionally seems powerful and someone whose authority is simply the ambient quality of how they exist. You've reached the end of this. And let's be precise about what has happened here. You were given 7 observations. Not about tactics. Not about how to manage impressions or perform power. About the specific ordinary ways that authority quietly leaves a person and what it looks like when it stays. The first, every explanation is information about where your uncertainty lives. You do not owe anyone a case for your decisions. The second, the preemptive apology is not humility. It is anxiety performing humility's clothing. And it teaches people that implied disapproval is sufficient to produce your retreat. The third, silence is not pressure, it is space. And the person who cannot let it exist, who must fill it, has told you everything about how to move them. The fourth, a standard explained until it is comfortable is no longer a standard. What is yours does not require defense. It requires only that you hold it. The fifth, performed certainty is detectable. Actual certainty is quiet. The person who has decided does not need the room to confirm the decision. The sixth, silence after provocation is not the absence of a response, it is the response. And it communicates something no reactive reply can match, that the provocation did not have enough mass to move you. The seventh, who you are in small moments is who you become in large ones. The work is not occasional, it is continuous. And the person whose discipline has become invisible because it has become consistent, that person is not performing authority. They have become it. This is what Machiavelli knew that most of his readers missed. He was not describing how to dominate others. He was describing how to stop being dominated by the need for approval, by the anxiety of disapproval, by the reflexive patterns that hand your composure to whoever is willing to reach for it. The prince he described at his most precise was not ruthless. He was settled. He was clear. He was someone who had closed the distance between who he was in private and who he was in public, so completely that the performance of power had become unnecessary because the thing itself is simply present. That is what you are building, not a persona, not a strategy you deploy in specific moments. A quality of presence that does not require explanation, that does not apologize for its existence, that does not fill silence to avoid the discomfort of being fully seen. That does not react to every provocation that arrives, because it is not available for automatic reaction. You are not like most people in this regard. You may not have fully understood why until now. The understanding is yours. What you do with the next moment that asks for an explanation, you do and owe anyone. That is where this either becomes real or remains theory. You already know what to do. You simply needed the clarity to trust it. The person who has nothing to explain has everything.